as a board member, the national board, and then also as an assistant director. I left and came back, and now in my latter ages, I'm back with epilepsy.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah, so that's my journey in a nutshell around epilepsy. I've been around for quite a while, and learning and understanding epilepsy through its major, I think, changes that we are here now at a very, seminal stage where we are talking of the concept of ICAP, the intersectoral collaboration, for epilepsy and other neurological condition, which is
Yeah.
seminal in how, yeah,
Before we
yes,
get into that, I think sometimes it's very easy to assume that when one mentions epilepsy, we think that everybody has an understanding of what it is. Could you just kindly briefly explain it in the most simplest way to the layman? What exactly is epilepsy and how does it affect one?
Yeah, epilepsy, it's a neurological, condition where how it manifests itself, it's through seizures that could be jerking, but because of a spectrum of conditions, epilepsy, you could be jerking. For some people, they just space out, and other people have got, have got a violent reaction where they send out expletives and so on. So it is a spectrum of manifestations which results as a result of an interference with the neurological functioning in the brain.
Okay. So because of this, sometimes, like you said, one would be jerking and twitching and whatnot. This can be perceived, particularly in the traditional sense, that maybe someone is having an episode because of a certain gift that they may have, or maybe they are bewitched and so forth. These are some of the things, the stigmas that exist around people who have epilepsy, or, and one of the objectives that I've seen with the organization is to try and destigmatize that in society. What are the objectives and how are you combating this within our society?
Look, the objective of epilepsy is to create a better world for people with epilepsy without stigma, to destigmatize the idea of epilepsy being, a result of some intervention by spirits and all the myths that actually surround them. But purely that is done with the objective of creating a better life. Because as we explain epilepsy, you'll understand that it is episodic, it is not a thing that carries on. Although seizures without being controlled and continuous seizures can lead to a condition of disability, but not all people with seizures are necessarily disabled, because
Yes.
if seizures are controlled, people can be able to live normal lives with reasonable accommodation of understanding that they don't have to work in areas that are highly stressful, because those could be triggers for people to have seizures. So our effort is to create more awareness and to open avenues for people with epilepsy so that they can be able to, live fulfilled lives. But however, also recognizing that in instances where epilepsy has created disability, to deal with that with providing appropriate services to deal with that.
Yes. What kind of services does Epilepsy South Africa, as well as particularly the Free State Northwest branch, offer to either residents or members of the community? For example, if my neighbor suddenly has small seizures, and of course, we're not particularly familiar with it unless you've experienced it yourself, what would this first step be to remedying the situation? Would I go to the center? What happens between their first seizure and actually getting help? What steps can a person take?
You see, what I would suggest is that if you look at epilepsy, it's a condition like any other condition.
Okay.
So obviously, if something happens to you, your first point of call is medical services. But because of stigma, people see it as different. And obviously, with all the myths surrounding epilepsy, you might find problem. That's why we are actually on a campaign to create awareness about what epilepsy is. Beyond that, epilepsy is triggered by other medical conditions, which medical people should be in a position to be able to, attend to. So my suggestion is that if a person has a seizure, to be able to know what to do in the interim before you send them to hospital, because there is also the other aspect where people are sent to hospital when the condition can be dealt with. And that is one of the things that lead to people being disabled. So we do public awareness, and our public awareness is around the first aid, in dealing with epilepsy, meaning that how, when a person has a seizure, what is the intervention that you need to do? Prime amongst that is that the tendency and the compulsion of more people is to stop the seizures. So we advise people, not to actually try and restrain and control the person. What is important is to actually get the person to be in a relaxed place, clear the airways, meaning that you've got to lie the person on the side so that if there is anything oozing out of the mouth, it must run out freely, right? And make them comfortable, right? Some of the ways that happens is that people could experience, they can actually have, pass water, they can, have, the biological things that would happen. So, and there is embarrassment around it. So you need to ensure that all those things are cared for to provide, care for the person, that, he's well cared for. And to make sure that when the person recovers after that, also you are able to sort of provide them the necessary support, in case they've wetted their pants, to be able to cover them and be able to do that. Then thereafter, so then thereafter, there is that thing that there could be an injury, or whatever it is. Obviously, medical intervention will have to take place, But in some instances, you might find that those interventions are adequate enough for the person to be able to be placed in a place to recover and they can go on.
Yes.
But there must be a clear understanding that what you don't, that eventually the person is either undergoing treatment. That is why it is important to make sure that you monitor the seizure, the length of the seizures, the severity of the seizure, and so on, to report to a medical official that is dealing with the person, because that can determine the efficacy of medication and therefore advise as to what is the further intervention on the person.
Speaking of advocacy and awareness, Ndetesoli, what are some of the things that you do to advocate for the human rights of the individuals with epilepsy? And
epilepsy,
the High Gap Initiative, as well as Epilepsy Week that is coming up on the 18th to the 25th of February next year.
I think the major advocacy program that epilepsy has undertaken in the recently, it's actually participation in IGAP, right? IGAP, it's like I said, very seminal in the fact that it actually has been a point at which it advocates for understanding of epilepsy, but also dealing with the challenges that people with epilepsy are confronted with. So the main focus of IGAP is to create a better environment for people with epilepsy by firstly being able to create awareness about treatment of epilepsy. Going further, to also engage with stakeholders in being able to undertake research, have a better understanding, and also influence the treatment facilities to be more receptive and sensitive to the needs of people with epilepsy in terms of medical care. Going further, it's that when people with epilepsy have particular on with their life, within IGAP, there is an emphasis on the issue of self-sustainability in terms of developing their capacity for independence through either employment, but providing support for education, looking at self-employment in terms of developing, businesses and so on. What we do is that in branches, we also develop self-help groups, which are generated at people learning hand skills to be able to generate an income and to be able to eat and live.
Okay. So for the person that has epilepsy and other neurological conditions, but is still fully functioning and wants, for example, now I'm going to go into the workspace as a person who is affected by epilepsy. When, for example, you do apply for employment, are you now held responsible to put in that you have this condition, and what are sort of the challenges that people face in the workplace with epilepsy, and what resources do you have that can help them with them?
Yeah, I'll start off with that stigma is the biggest problem.
Yes.
The very same people that have got stigma in society are the people in employment, and individually they've got attitude. So when you disclose, it's actually often a problem. But what epilepsy in the broader sense is involved in as an organization, we are participating in other organizations dealing with discrimination against people with disabilities. So what we do in terms of that is creating more awareness amongst employers in terms of what are reasonable accommodations. And maybe let me explain what I mean by reasonable accommodations. It's what employers have to do to be able to make it possible for people with epilepsy to function in the workplace. And fortunately, with people with epilepsy, it is less onerous. And when I say less onerous, I mean that unlike, and not in actual fact comparing, is that a person with physical disability might need an adapted computer, right? Or a computer that is adjusted, that speaks, that does that type of thing. But a person with epilepsy needs to be understood that they can have a seizure, and that seizure is caused by stresses. So that work environment has got to be conducive and be able to do that. So you don't have that demand for physical adaptation for a person with epilepsy, which have but cost implication, And in saying that, not saying that the other people deserve to be, ostracized and so on. With people with epilepsy, it's much easier.
The main thing is to in the workplace is different from that of the person that's obviously physically disabled.
And if employers are more understanding, they would actually be in a position to do that. But we must also distinguish that because of the nature of epilepsy could have been a result of other disabling factors. For instance, certain people with intellectual or other conditions could have epilepsy as a manifestation of whatever it is. Now, those people
correct,
become unemployable or difficult to accommodate in the employment situation, not necessarily, and also in certain functions. Not because of the epilepsy, is because of the other condition. But we understand as well that people with intellectual disabilities as well need to be given a chance, because there is still a reasonable accommodation where you can have what is called supported employment for people with intellectual disabilities, that they've got someone in the workplace that walks behind them to be able to enable them to perform their function. So not all is lost.
Yes. Solely, what can the average person do to help with the organization? How can one perhaps get membership? Which resources are online that they may visit today after seeing this interview, of course? What can we do as South Africans to support our brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I think we need first of all, for people to be able to understand that there is help, and help comes through organizations like ours, right? We need support to do the work, to be able to reach out to people. So we also need participation of communities by taking up membership. And because when you take membership, you can be participate in their destiny and actually promoting things like IGAP to ensure that they reach us widely to make the lives of persons with epilepsy better.
Okay. Dr. Soli, what can one use? Maybe a website or contact details? Dr. Soli?
And I'll share this with you after this. We can actually join us on our website. We've got a national website. And if you take up membership, you are actually able to gain access to webinars, various discussions on epilepsy, and so on. So it is vital that, I think after this, we can actually share with you the details of our, how you can get membership, details to get onto our website and the various social media platforms that you can communicate with us to be able to gain a better understanding of what we do. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Soli. Thank you so much for sitting with us today and spreading awareness for epilepsy. Like we said, we're going to be doing epilepsy. Epilepsy has an Epilepsy Awareness Week from the 18th to the 25th February 2025. But in the meantime, of course, go to the epilepsy website anytime you wish. Thank you, Dr. Soli, and we'll speak another time, hopefully.
Thank you so much. And as we say, we wish you to have a Merry Christmas, but always think about the oncoming Epilepsy Week, which we would like more participation and interest from the communities. Thank you.
Dr. Soli, thank you.
Pleasure.